The December chill crept through the small town, frosting windows and weighing down pine branches with white powder. Inside the Harrison household, warmth was absent despite the glowing fireplace. "You're not invited to Christmas this year," Dad snapped, his voice sharp as an icicle. He stood tall in his pressed sweater, arms folded across his chest. "You've become too difficult. This holiday is about family, not drama." I stared at him, fighting the sting in my chest. Not invited? Christmas had always been sacred in our family. Every year, Dad hosted the biggest gathering in town, obsessing over the tree placement, the food, the carols sung in perfect order. And now I was banished, like some outcast. "Fine," I muttered, my voice steadier than I felt. I turned on my heel and walked out, the slam of the door echoing like a declaration. At first, the loneliness gnawed at me. The thought of sitting in my apartment alone, watching everyone else bask in Christmas cheer, was unbearable. But then an idea sparked, tiny at first, then blazing bright. If Dad thought he could strip me of Christmas, he was wrong. I wouldn't beg for a seat at his perfect table. I'd create my own. The following week was a blur of planning. I bought strings of fairy lights, a Christmas tree taller than my ceiling could handle, and boxes of ornaments in every color. My apartment transformed into a glowing wonderland, warm, inviting, everything Dad's rigid traditions never allowed. Then came the invitations. I didn't just call friends. I reached out to neighbors, coworkers, even a few cousins Dad had dismissed years ago for not fitting his image of success. "You're having your own Christmas?" my cousin Sarah asked over the phone, her voice hesitant. "Yes," I said firmly. "No judgments, no rules, no exclusion. Just food, music, and laughter. You're welcome if you want real joy." She was quiet for a moment, then whispered, "I'll be there. Dad hasn't let me come to Christmas since I dyed my hair blue. Thank you." Word spread faster than I expected. By Christmas Eve, nearly everyone had RSVP'd yes. When the night arrived, my tiny apartment buzzed with life. The air smelled of roasted ham, mulled cider, and freshly baked cookies. Laughter bounced off the walls as kids chased each other through the hallway, adults lounged on couches with mugs of cocoa, and music played freely without Dad's strict playlist order. I stood in the middle of it all, heart swelling. These were people Dad had cast aside, too loud, too messy, too different. But here, they were family. Midway through the evening, Sarah tapped my shoulder. She asked with a mischievous grin, "Have you checked your phone?" I glanced down. My notifications were exploding. Social media feeds were filled with photos of our gathering, smiling faces, kids unwrapping presents, the tree glowing brighter than any in town. The captions were telling, "Best Christmas ever. Finally a place we belong. Thank you for giving us this." And then I saw it. Dad's party had started. Or rather, failed to. Someone had tagged me in a post showing his immaculate dining room set for 20 people, the table glittering with untouched silverware, candles burning alone. But the seats were empty. Not a single guest had shown up. Later that night, as we passed around dessert, I pictured Dad pacing in his perfectly decorated but silent house. For once, his obsession with appearances had crumbled. He had the turkey, the fine china, the spotless tablecloth, but no family to share it with. Because family doesn't gather around control. They gather around love. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The sound of laughter filling my apartment was enough. Still, a quiet satisfaction warmed me in a way the cider couldn't. Toward the end of the night, when the last gifts were exchanged and guests began to drift home, Sarah hugged me tightly. "You reminded us what Christmas is really about. Dad never understood, but you do." Her words lingered after everyone left, the silence of my apartment now peaceful rather than lonely. I curled up by the glowing tree, sipping the last of the cider, my heart lighter than it had been in years. Dad may have tried to exclude me, but in doing so, he set me free. I had discovered something he never could. Family isn't defined by blood, rules, or appearances. It's defined by who shows up when matters most. That Christmas, I learned revenge didn't always mean cruelty. Sometimes the sweetest revenge was joy, shared, multiplied, and impossible to take away. And as the snow fell softly outside, I whispered to myself with a smile, "Merry Christmas, Dad. I hope you enjoy your perfect silence." Snow had hardly melted from the sidewalks when word of Dad's disastrous, perfect Christmas began circling around town. People chuckled quietly, whispering about his empty dining table and his absence from the season's joy. But if there was one thing I knew about my father, it was that he wouldn't admit defeat. By mid-January, he was already calling relatives, vowing that next Christmas would be the grandest yet. He spoke of rare decorations, expensive wine shipments, and of course, his prized turkey dinner, the crown jewel of his legacy. It was his tradition, his pride, and suddenly I knew exactly how I'd return the favor this year. All year long, I planned quietly. While Dad bragged about the turkey he'd roast and the guests he'd reclaim, I made friends with the town's butcher. Mr. Nelson ran the only shop that sold the organic, specially fed turkeys Dad demanded. By October, I had an arrangement. "Put aside your best cuts, Mr. Nelson," I told him with a wink. "I'll pay in advance. Just don't let Dad get his hands on them." Mr. Nelson chuckled, handing me the receipt. "Never liked your father's arrogance anyway. Consider it done." I didn't stop there. I pre-ordered honey hams, fresh cranberries, specialty wines, and even the rare imported chocolates Dad always insisted on serving. Slowly but surely, I emptied the shelves before Dad even thought to shop. December arrived, crisp and glittering, the air filled with holiday cheer. My apartment glowed again, ready for another gathering, bigger than last year since word had spread that my Christmas was the one worth attending. Meanwhile, Dad was preparing his redemption. I heard it through cousins and neighbors. This time it'll be perfect. He's going all out. The turkey will be unforgettable. Except it wouldn't. Christmas Eve came, and the storm hit. I got the first inkling when Sarah texted me a photo of Dad storming out of the butcher's shop, his face red with fury. The caption read, "No turkey for the tyrant." Apparently, the best birds were all gone. Every last one reserved under my name. He had begged, threatened, even offered triple the price, but Mr. Nelson simply shook his head. "Sorry, Harrison, should have thought ahead." Next came the grocery stores. By then, the aisles were stripped bare of festive staples. All the good wine, the rich cheeses, the pastries, bought out by me weeks ago. Dad was left with canned beans, bruised apples, and a frozen chicken that looked more fit for a Tuesday supper than a grand feast. That night, my party sparkled. The scent of golden roasted turkey and honey-glazed ham filled the air, guests laughing as they clinked glasses of the finest wine. Kids tore into gifts, while neighbors traded stories by the fireplace. I snapped photos here and there, cheerful, harmless pictures of smiling faces and food so mouth-watering it belonged on a magazine cover. Then, with deliberate care, I posted them online. Another magical Christmas with the people that matter most. #family is love, #best feast ever. The likes and comments poured in instantly, the town remembering last year's fiasco. Meanwhile, across town, Dad's night was unraveling. Cousins whispered that the grand feast had turned into a sad display of overcooked chicken and dry bread rolls. Guests exchanged awkward glances at his frustration, some even slipping away early with excuses. By midnight, his table was nearly as empty as the year before. I thought I'd feel nothing but smug satisfaction, but when Sarah called me from her car, stifling laughter, it hit me harder than I expected. "You should have seen his face when the chicken came out," she said between giggles. "He looked like he'd swallowed coal. And then when someone pulled out their phone and saw your pictures, oh God, he nearly exploded." I couldn't help but chuckle. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about proving a point, that joy couldn't be dictated, love couldn't be controlled, and Christmas wasn't about one man's ego. As the clock struck midnight and my guests raised a toast, I whispered under my breath, "Merry Christmas, Dad. Hope you enjoyed your beans." That night, as the snow thickened outside and laughter carried through my apartment, I realized something. Revenge was sweet, but freedom was sweeter. Dad could keep trying to host his perfect Christmas, but perfection meant nothing without people to share it with. And me? I had more than enough. Still, I won't lie. Watching his downfall 2 years in a row was the best gift Santa ever delivered. By the time the next Christmas rolled around, Dad's pride was in tatters. 2 years of humiliation, first an empty house, then a failed feast, had done something I never thought possible. He stopped speaking to me altogether. I thought maybe, just maybe, that meant peace. But in November, a cousin pulled me aside with news. "He's only inviting Mark this year," she whispered, her eyes darting around the cafe. "Your brother. Everyone else too, but not you. He told the family you've turned Christmas into some circus and he wants a real heir to carry on the tradition." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. Mark, the golden child, had always been Dad's favorite. Straight-laced, obedient, the one who wore the sweaters Dad bought without complaint. And now, Dad was doubling down, erasing me completely while polishing Mark's halo. I went home that night with an ache in my chest. Revenge had been sweet before, but this time the exclusion cut deeper. I knew if I tried another petty scheme, I'd look small. I needed something bigger, not just to hurt Dad, but to reclaim my own sense of worth. That's when the idea struck. Instead of planning another glittering party, I signed up to volunteer at the local homeless shelter. Christmas Eve dinner was their busiest night, feeding over 100 people who had nowhere else to go. When I walked in, arms loaded with pies and casseroles, the air felt different from any holiday I'd ever known. The shelter buzzed with chatter, kids' laughter, and the clatter of trays. Volunteers wore Santa hats and reindeer antlers, their smiles genuine, unforced. "Glad you're here," the coordinator said, handing me an apron. "We need extra hands tonight." I spent hours serving food, handing out toys, and sitting with people whose stories cracked my heart open. A mother with 2 children who'd lost their home, an older man who hadn't spoken to his family in years, a teenager who said this was the only Christmas dinner he'd get. As I listened, I realized something. These people weren't missing Christmas because they weren't worthy. They were missing it because life had been cruel. And still, here they were, smiling through hardship, grateful for the smallest kindness. At one point, Mrs. Ellis tapped me on the shoulder. "Would you mind handing out the gifts? You've got the spirit." I laughed, taking the Santa hat she plopped on my head. One by one, I passed out wrapped toys, scarves, gloves, and small treats. The kids' faces lit up, the parents teared up, and for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't just hosting Christmas. I was living it. A volunteer snapped photos, me handing a toy truck to a boy who hugged me like I was Santa himself, me laughing with a group of women over hot cocoa, me sitting cross-legged on the floor with kids building blocks. By the end of the night, those photos were all over social media, tagged and shared by people who were grateful someone cared. Meanwhile, Dad's Christmas was going just as he had planned, or so he thought. A perfectly decorated house, a golden brown turkey, carols sung off his sheet music. But when cousins scrolled through their phones at the table, they saw something different. Me, surrounded by joy that money couldn't buy. "This is what Christmas is supposed to look like," someone whispered at his table. "Not this performance." The shift spread like wildfire. Neighbors praised the shelter dinner, people in town reposted the pictures, and soon even distant relatives called me with words of pride. "Your father disinvited you, but you embodied the holiday more than he ever did." By Boxing Day, the narrative was set. Dad wasn't the generous patriarch anymore. He was the bitter man who excluded his own child while that child fed strangers. Sarah came over a few days later, grinning as she handed me her phone. "Look," she said. It was a community blog post titled, "The True Spirit of Christmas Lives at the Shelter." The feature photo was me in the Santa hat, kneeling with kids, laughter in my eyes. "Dad's furious," she added. "He told Mark that you staged it for attention, but no one's buying it. Everyone knows he's the one obsessed with appearances, not you." I stared at the screen, a strange peace washing over me. For once, I didn't even care about Dad's anger. I had given joy where it was needed, and people saw that. This revenge wasn't about humiliating him anymore. It was about showing the contrast so clearly that the world decided for itself, and it had. On New Year's Eve, as fireworks bloomed across the sky, I thought back to that first Christmas when Dad slammed the door on me. I'd been broken, desperate for belonging. Now, I realized I had created my own place, one that couldn't be taken away. Family, after all, wasn't about who excluded you. It was about who embraced you, whether by blood or by choice, or even by chance, in a crowded shelter on Christmas Eve. And as for Dad, well, He had his perfect house, his perfect table, and his perfectly hollow silence. By the fourth Christmas after my banishment, Dad had grown desperate. His pride was battered, his reputation in tatters. Neighbors still whispered about the year his guests vanished, the year his turkey turned into chicken, the year his perfect Christmas was overshadowed by photos of me handing out gifts at the shelter. But instead of changing, he dug in deeper. This year, Sarah whispered over the phone, he's planning something massive, a catered banquet, a live quartet, even professional carolers. He says he'll prove he's still the head of this family. I couldn't help but laugh. It was so very Dad, trying to buy respect he'd long since lost. And then she added the part that made me sit up straighter. He's expecting you to help pay for it, even though you're not invited. I froze. What? Yeah, she sighed. He told relatives, my child owes me support. They may not be here, but they'll still cover their share of the cost. That was it. Dad had crossed into a new level of arrogance. Not only did he exclude me, he still expected me to bankroll his ego parade. This time, my revenge wasn't going to be petty. It was going to be practical. All year, Dad had been leaning on me financially without even realizing it. The utilities for his giant house, still partly in my name from when I helped him after Mom died. The credit card he used for emergencies linked to my old account. Even the catering company he booked this Christmas had quietly used my co-signed guarantee. And that was where the plan began. 2 weeks before Christmas, I withdrew everything. I closed the joint accounts, canceled the guarantee, and called the catering service to revoke payment authorization. I sent polite but firm letters to every vendor Dad had bragged about hiring. By the time Christmas week rolled around, Dad had no idea his empire was built on sand. On Christmas Eve, the unraveling began. First, the caterers never arrived. Dad paced furiously in his immaculate kitchen, waiting for trays of roasted meats and pastries that would never come. When he called the company, they told him the order had been canceled due to non-payment. What do you mean non-payment? My child always covers it. Not this year, sir, the manager replied coolly. Next came the carolers. They too had canceled when their deposit bounced. The quartet followed. Even the delivery of his special imported wine had been halted. By 6 o'clock, relatives were arriving to find a grand house with nothing. No feast, no music, no gifts piled high under the tree. Just Dad, red-faced, and scrambling to explain why the greatest Christmas ever had turned into crumbs and silence. Meanwhile, my Christmas was very different. Instead of pouring money into appearances, I'd used it to surprise the younger cousins, Mark's kids, Sarah's little ones, even the neighbors' children Dad never let inside his house. That afternoon, I picked them all up in a rented bus and drove them to the mountains. There, in a cozy lodge strung with fairy lights, we built snowmen, drank hot cocoa, and unwrapped gifts by a roaring fire. The squeals of laughter as the kids tumbled down snowy hills echoed louder than any quartet ever could. Their parents, relieved to escape Dad's suffocating expectations, joined me in raising mugs of cider to a Christmas free of control. Photos flooded social media once again. Children sledding, cousins in matching scarves, families gathered around a glowing fireplace. The caption I chose was simple. Christmas isn't about bills or banquets. It's about joy, and joy can't be bought. Back at Dad's house, chaos reigned. Guests slipped out quietly, muttering excuses as the truth became obvious. Without his financial crutches, he had nothing to offer but a bare table and his own anger. By the end of the night, his grand event had collapsed completely. He was left alone in his cavernous dining room, staring at an unpaid bill and a cold stove. Sarah called me from the mountain lodge around midnight. He's furious, she whispered, half laughing, half exhausted. But honestly, he deserves it. You should see the kids right now. They're happier than they've ever been. You gave them the Christmas he never could. As I tucked the younger cousins into their bunk beds at the lodge, one of them looked up at me sleepily. Thank you, she murmured. This is the best Christmas ever. And just like that, I knew the revenge had worked. Not because Dad was humiliated again, though he was, but because I'd given joy where he'd only tried to demand obedience. The sweetest twist wasn't financial at all. It was that the very people Dad thought he owned had chosen me instead. That night, as the snow blanketed the mountains in silence, I stood outside, watching the lights glow through the lodge windows. Dad's empire of control was crumbling, and in its place, I was building something real. One laugh, one snowball, one warm embrace at a time. Christmas wasn't his anymore. It never really had been. It was ours. 5 Christmases had passed since Dad slammed the door in my face. 5 years of silence, humiliation, pettiness, and finally, collapse. Each year, his empire of control shrank a little more. Each year, mine grew. Neighbors, friends, cousins, even his forgotten children finding warmth at my side. But Dad still clung to his throne of pride. By autumn of the 5th year, I began hearing whispers. He was borrowing money in town, overpromising things he couldn't pay for. Rumors of an affair trickled through the grapevine, too. A woman half his age spotted slipping into his car late at night. And then there were the financial lies. Unpaid taxes, debts hidden behind fake charity donations. All the things he'd tried so hard to bury. And suddenly, I knew. It was time. This year, I wasn't just going to show him up. I was going to strip away the mask he'd worn all my life. I began quietly. A photocopied letter here, a screenshot there, the tax notices he'd ignored, the credit card bills piling up in red, old emails he'd once sent me bragging about his business deals that were little more than scams. Then the photograph, Dad and his mistress walking hand in hand past the town square. A perfect crack in his perfect image. I bundled it all together into neat, damning packages, and on Christmas week, I wrapped them in festive envelopes marked, "From Santa." One by one, I mailed them, to cousins, to siblings, to neighbors who'd once admired his polished charm, and finally, one last envelope addressed to him, left sitting under his tree like a ticking bomb. Christmas Eve arrived. While my lodge filled with family once again, kids chasing each other with candy canes, laughter spilling like music, I knew Dad's house would not be echoing the same cheer. Reports trickled in almost instantly. Cousins calling me, voices sharp with shock. "We just got these letters. Is it true?" Neighbors whispering online. "Did you know Harrison hasn't paid his taxes in years? That he's been stealing from his own relatives?" Sarah texted me a single photo around 9 p.m. Dad at the head of his long, empty table, holding one of my letters in trembling hands. The guests had all left, scandal buzzing louder than carols ever could. His face was pale, his mouth thin as paper. I stepped outside the lodge for air, the snow crunching beneath my boots. For a moment, guilt flickered through me. This was no turkey prank, no harmless withdrawal of funds. This was destruction. But then I remembered every insult, every year he called me ungrateful, every time he exiled cousins for not fitting his mold, every Christmas he tried to own as his personal kingdom. I remembered the night he looked me in the eye and said, "You're not invited." Well, now he wasn't invited either. Not to his family's respect, not to their trust, not even to the illusion of control. The mask was gone. Inside, the children's laughter grew louder. The younger ones tugged me back toward the fire, begging for another story. I sat with them, telling tales of Santa sneaking down chimneys, my voice carrying over the crackling logs. Their eyes sparkled, their smiles unshaken by the storm unraveling across town. And that was when it hit me. The revenge wasn't for me anymore. It was for them. So they'd never grow up thinking love was control or that Christmas was a cage. The next morning, as sunlight poured over snow-draped rooftops, Sarah came to me, her eyes wide. "It's over," she said simply. "That's finished. The family knows, the neighbors know, even Mark can't defend him anymore. He's alone." I nodded slowly, staring into my mug of cocoa. Alone. That word used to describe me, but not anymore. I looked around the lodge at cousins laughing over board games, neighbors trading leftover cookies, kids curled up with new toys. A family, imperfect but real, a family built not on fear but on choice. For years, Dad had tried to make Christmas about him. Now, at last, it belonged to everyone else. That night, as we packed up the decorations and prepared to return home, I whispered one last thought into the snowy night. Merry Christmas, Dad. This was never about ruining you. It was about freeing the rest of us. And now we are free. And with that, the saga was over. The revenge had been sweet, then petty, then emotional, then financial, and finally, complete. Dad's perfect image lay in ruins, but I had something better, a new tradition, a new family, and a joy no one could take away. Christmas wasn't his anymore. It was mine. It was ours.